Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Leonie Bradbury, like Bill said, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. And it's really my pleasure to introduce you to two innovative artists working in Boston right now. Our conversation today will cover topics as diverse as cosmic vibration, perception, and a practice of unlearning, a term that emerged out of our conversations leading up to this event. So this evening we'll join two of my favorite artists, Nicole and Nathan Miner, as they discuss artistic research as a place of possibilities, an open-ended strategy of experimentation and failure that can lead to new modes of thinking that reframes knowledge conventions. As a curator, I'm very well aware that artists and artistic research can really change how we think and can open us up to bigger ideas. So both artists have a very transdisciplinary practice that dynamically intersects with technology, science, philosophy, and creatively challenge preconceptions as they expand the role of art in society. So the first artist who we're going to be looking at is Nathan Miner, and I'll tell you a little bit about the structure of this evening. We're going to have a three-part event. First, we will have short artist talk, looking at images and works, recent works by each of the artists, where we go and do a little bit of a deep dive and look more closely at a few of their works. And then we will transition into a conversation. And then towards the end, we will open it up and for Q&A and open the conversation up to the audience. So Nathan Miner lives and works in Boston. Over the past decade, Miner has exhibited in many galleries, alternative art spaces, and universities, including recent installations at Stephen Zavidas Gallery in Boston and Raphael's Fine Gallery. He also exhibited at Monsour College of Art in Beverly, which is how we met, and the Museum of Art at the University of New Hampshire. His exhibitions have been reviewed by the Boston Globe, and his work has been featured in Art Pulse, Artscope magazine, and Miner's work belongs to the Wellington Collection among many private collections. He has been an artist in residence at Mass MoCA and the Vermont Studio Center, and he's currently pursuing a Master's of Science degree in Game Science and Design from the College of Art, Media, and Design at Northeastern University. So I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that. So we'll begin our evening with a short video to introduce you to Nathan's recent work and the exhibition Ghostwriter, which was on view at Stephen Zavidas Gallery over the summer. So if we can just start the video.
I'm Nathan Miner. It's August 2020, and we're here in the Stephen Zavidas Gallery with my exhibition Ghostwriter. The work in the show spans about 4 years. These works on paper and the scroll began after a visit to a shaman where I had a vision of being inside a well. In that vision, I came to realize that it wasn't me inside the well, but an illusion of myself. And through the process of negotiating, retrieving that concept of myself from this imaginary well, I realized a number of things that over the last 4 years I've been exploring in my work. This piece is titled Retrieval. I made these pieces, all the works on paper, in an effort to discover something about myself. Our concepts of ourselves are built in a feedback between the world and our experiences in the world. That feedback process ends up driving who we are. I started just painting with white paint on the white paper and couldn't really see what was happening. The work has been a container for me to reflect on that edge of our agency in the world. This scroll is about 30 feet long, and in the show is bound. So there's just the very beginning of it that we can see, and there's all these notes from my ideas about what the piece was and what I wanted to explore with it. That the work can be a reprieve from the illusion of understanding, and can surrender to the ideas of the self. It says here, stopping the world, moving through a wall of fog. Stopping the world is an idea that I got from Carlos Castaneda. It's not stopping the physical world, but stopping the illusions of understanding the world. Knowing can be a limitation on discovery.
Thank you, Nathan. So before I share my screen and we move on to the next slide, I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on this concept of the illusion of understanding and how you see it relating to your work.
Absolutely. I think that so what I talked about a little bit is this feedback process of our experience, and thinking about how our experiences in the world, how we perceive those experiences, end up shaping how we think about ourselves. And one of the things that I've thought a lot about with my work is this kind of persistent illusion that we live with, that the world is made of objects. Like, we see the surface of the world and tend to think of ourselves as objects within the world. And that's a kind of a time scale that's the short now, kind of immediate time scale. And thinking over the long now, a more generational time scale, or trying to expand that scope of understanding the self more as a pattern across time rather than an object or an entity that's fixed, something that's constantly changing and developing.
Okay, thank you. And I think I'd like to share my screen now. And I'm going to share a couple of images of your work. And I wanted you to maybe address and describe this first image, which we used for the invitation. And I myself, I was glad I asked you today what this was, and if you could clarify for me. But I think, it relates so much to the work that you did for the Ghostwriter exhibition. And this piece is called Vision Quest. And maybe you can tell the audience a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. This, and some of you know it very particularly, but this piece came from an idea of being inside of an artwork, basically surrounded by the artwork. And one of the other paintings that I'm looking forward to talking about with you is called Chimera, which is a painting for a curved wall that created this immersive effect. And when I was working on that curved wall, I got inspired by that sense of immersion and wanted to create a piece that would totally surround the viewer. And that's how this scroll started. The image that we're looking at is an augmented reality version of the artwork. So I can put a link to this in the comments, but I built an app for the exhibition that allowed you to create a virtual version of this artwork wherever you are, and then you can look at it through your phone and walk through it. So this is an instance of that artwork hovering in downtown Boston. On the inside of it, you can see that it's a ring. This is the length of this 30-foot long scroll just wrapped around and connected on itself again. What can I say about the Vision Quest aspect to it? When I started making it, I wasn't sure. I was making it in order to find out what it could be. It wasn't making it, I wasn't working towards a preconceived goal. The goal of the artwork was really to discover what the possibilities were. And So it became an arena, basically, for possibilities.
Yeah, so maybe I have the piece that you just mentioned, Chimera. I have some images of that. And this is actually, oh, there we go. Here it is. And I think this was a really important piece in terms of your practice, and it was an opportunity for you to explore ideas that you had been interested in for a while, but at a different scale. And I think it would be interesting for you to share a little bit about this particular piece and the process of making it. And I do have some images also of the piece being in process. So.
Yeah, which images did you have of that? And maybe we can start there. Are they just the next ones?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So I have two of these diagrams, and then the text piece, and then the first layer.
Yeah, cool. Go ahead and go deeper into these. That's a good one for everybody to understand what's going on with that wall. That was an important bit. This one, yeah, okay, let's start with the one before. So what we're seeing in this image is actually a study for the painting. It was a smaller scale piece, about 30 inches across. Just the figures in it are coming from an aerial photograph of a city, and has been abstracted through a lot of different Photoshop filters and printed out and then worked on top of with watercolor and airbrush. And when I was making that small piece, I put this this bend in it. And that's what gave me the idea initially to create a curved artwork. And at that time, I hadn't actually figured out the paneling process that would allow me to do really large scale pieces. That study was made in 2009. The first really large scale immersive painting I made was for a corner, and that was in 2011. So the composition for this painting basically gave me an idea. I had an inkling, an intuition about what it would take to create a really large scale painting that had a curve to it. But had no idea about the engineering for the paneling to build my process to that level. If you go back to the previous one, you see this is a distorted image from an encyclopedia. And on the lower right is the definition for chimera. And that idea of an amalgamation of beings, like an impossible being, basically comprised of multiple different mythological beasts, was, for me, I was thinking about how our ideas of the self are kind of like impossible beings. Like we have the physical self and the psychological self, and the reality of our existence is, from the outside, maybe impossible to know. We only have the inside view of that. So a lot of, if you go to maybe the setup at Montserrat would be good. Yeah. So this process that I had developed was a kind of iterative back and forth feedback loop between working digitally and working with traditional painting techniques, and a wide mix of them, including tiny little fine point watercolor pencils to oil paint. And what you can't really make out in this image is that this curve is made up of 11 different narrow panels that fit together. This is from a fisheye lens in the top of the gallery. So it creates this illusion that the bottom edge of the painting is actually flat. And what I did, now if you can skip back to those diagrammatical layouts, what I did with this was, so I had this idea of this subtle curve that from a point in the center of the space, looking at this piece, imagining like a little rectangle expanding out from 62 inches or whatever the viewer's height would be through this curved wall. That's the shape that it cut. And what happened in the actual gallery, standing in front, if you would kind of just gaze into the center of the artwork, you could see in real time your brain trying to rewrite the physical experience of the object into something that better matched what our expectations are, that being like regular rectangles on flat walls. The curvature of the wall and the curvature of the painting started to be harder to perceive, and really toyed with the experience of perception, which was exciting to me. And another surprise that worked really well, I think, for the piece was the sound that speaking in that space, the subtle curve would focus the sound right back at you in a way that
Go back to, or do you mind if we go back to the image, Nathan?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, this is such a gorgeous image. Yeah, I think the concept of sound, I think, would be nice to kind of wrap up the description, and it'd be a nice transition into Nicole's work. So maybe if you could speak a little bit more about the sound aspect.
Yeah, it was great to make this painting, and it, you know, having people coming into the gallery while it was in process. I got to share it with people in a different way than often happens in exhibition settings. And one of the things that I would do is try to see how it was working for people, see how their experience of perception was going. So I would walk them through this process. And sometimes when the sound, they said something, they saw something that was interesting, they noticed the sound, their attention would spike, and they would pay, it was a dramatically elevated moment of experience where they were seeing and perceiving in a much deeper, more attentive way. That was really exciting for me as a painter to key into that.
Yeah, and it really felt like the sound was surrounding you when you stood in the, you know, right place in front of the piece. It was quite incredible. So thank you, Nathan. We'll talk more. I'm going to now stop sharing the screen for just a moment to introduce Nicole. So Nicole is an artist who is originally from Santiago, Chile. She's currently based in Boston. Through installation, performances, sculptures, compositions, her work explores human and non-human performativity, resonant architectures, as well as vibration and sound, and construction materials for spaces, identity, and agency. She works at the intersection of music, art, architecture, science, and technology to challenge perceptual conventions and to open the possibility of new imaginaries. Nicole is part of the MIT Media Lab Space Exploration Initiative, where she explores experimental forms and implications of art, expression, and culture in outer space. She's currently a PhD candidate and research assistant at MIT Media Lab, the Opera of the Future group, which is how we met. And she also holds a Master in Media Arts and Sciences from MIT Media Lab. So Nicole's work poses questions about agency and movement. What is the relationship between the programmer and the robot? How can sound be understood as an architectural building block? And in this context, how far can the traditional limits of composition and construction be pushed? So the first piece that we're going to be looking at together is a piece that she installed in the gallery at Emerson Contemporary earlier this year. Yeah, so this is a piece, The Dancer, which, you know, as I just mentioned, you installed for Emerson Contemporary, and it was a really incredible sonic robot that made a very loud noise at times, and it had this musical score that really had quite an impact on the overall exhibition, which was called Space Time. So I would love for you to tell us more about this piece.
Yes, thank you so much for everything. And thank you for this invitation and for everybody for being here. So this is The Dancer. And The Dancer, it's it's an experiment about how, it's an experiment around topics of non-human performativity and how through vibrations and resonance, there's dynamism in the world, and kind of like how to understand that everything that is matter has the capacity of resonating and vibrating. And in that sense, the world is never at rest. The world is constantly performing in dynamism, in oscillation. So in that scope of understanding for the exhibition that Leonie curated, the dancer had a participation by being in the space and appropriating this space by its movement. And the movement was as Leon explained, provoked by the sound and the noise of its own body. So the whole dance of the dancer comes from the shaking of embodying its own noise, let's say. So that's the dancer.
Thank you, Nicole. And the next piece that we're going to be looking at is El Poema de la Fábrica Cósmica. And this is a major international project that Nicole created as part of a residency, which allowed her to explore the links between Chile and the cosmos, bridging the gap between her own past and the present. So Nicole, if you could tell us more about this work.
Yes, of course. So this piece I developed last year in a residency that was part in Chile, but also part in Switzerland at CERN. So it was a dual residency that was called Symmetria. And the first part was done at CERN in the Large Hadron Collider. So we got to like explore all the detectors and all the experiments down in CERN with the scientists and like all the engineering and visiting all these places. And then the other part of the residency was done in the Atacama Desert in the ALMA Observatory and the Paranal Observatory from ISO. And the whole idea of this residency was to do part of the research and exploration at CERN in Switzerland underground. So all these detectors, there are like between 60 and 100 meters underground. And the whole like detector, it's like the whole architecture, it's a large scale sensor, let's say. So it's a large scale apparatus to understand and unveil reality somehow. And then in contrast, by being, in this picture, you can see it. So the picture on the right, it's inside of the detector. This is in the ALICE detector. So it's like 80 meters underground. And the picture on the left is in the ALMA Observatory. It's around 3,000 meters above the level of the sea in the Atacama Desert. And then the contrast was between CERN and the observatories is that in high altitude, in the open space, where like actually like Earth itself becomes a detector with this like the whole system of like radio astronomy in ALMA. The idea was to take this device, as you can see, this like sonic sculpture with 6 speakers that I called the Paracantora. And the Paracantora has the virtue of being this sort of like technological parasitic shaman that goes places, and it's this traveling culture that visits different places and has a bunch of like environmental sensors and different ways to unveil other layers of what's happening in these places. Like, let's say, like what are like the non-human activities in these places. So the Paracantora transduces them in real time and creates a song, a sonic poem for each of those places in that specific moment in space and time. So, and it's always with the same calibration. So the Paracantora, by traveling different places that are very contrasting, she ends up unveiling poems that are very different for each of the places in that moment and specifically. So that's the poema. And this way, the Paracantora builds up a poem for each of the places, for each of these cosmic factories. fábricas cósmicas.
Yeah, this is such an amazing project. I can't wait to hear more about it. And we have one more piece that we want to share with everyone, Telemetron. And this was a piece that you created as part of the MIT Space Exploration Initiative, where you were invited to participate in a zero gravity flight. So we'll, hopefully the video will work. It will just show about a minute of it. That must have been such an amazing experience.
It was really incredible. Yeah, it was unique. It was really mind-blowing. It was such a great opportunity to be able also like to think about something like, for example, well, just to explain a tiny bit, the telemetron, as you saw in the video, it's a musical instrument for microgravity. And it was really amazing there's a lot in my work that it's very plays with like imagining futures and alternative ways of perceiving and understanding the world. And this was like such a special way to test something that otherwise could have been just like a speculative project. So the fact to be in that zero gravity flight was really incredible to be able to test this project, to do an experiment around this art piece that is also that it became not only like an imagination of something, but something that happened, something that created also like new ideas and new possibilities. So for example, one thing that I really like about that piece is that when we were going to the flight, we had all these choreographies, all these performances prepared and thought. Then we go to the flight with my collaborator Sans Fish, and then we start floating and we start performing with the telemetron, and we realized that all the things that we had prepared are actually like they were not possible to be done. Like our own bodies were like just like recalculating and like re-being somehow, like re-understanding how to place yourself in that new environment where you're like liking like this thing that you take for granted, that is gravity, right? So it was really amazing to understand that. And because not only like it made us think that we cannot just like think things as we're used to think things, but like when you're creating these things that are defying your even sense of like perception, you need to like really recalibrate the sense of things that you take for granted and the things that you know. So it's a lot about unlearning, for example. And the thing that mostly like I learned to unlearn from this experience and this piece is to rethink the idea of an instrument not as something that you perform, not as something that you master, that there's like the performer that is the master of the instrument, but it's something that you have a relationship with. So for me, the telemetron ended up being this like just like another body, and in the end, it was two bodies being in a new way in space, and that was like really important for me in the development of my career and like the things that I'm working on right now in my PhD.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. That reminds me actually of Nathan, of your kind of recent or fairly recent explorations of augmented reality and how you've been creating new worlds, and also how you've had to kind of reteach yourself how to be in this new space, and not, you know, really having a direct translation between what your body's doing and what's happening in the space around you.
Yeah, VR can be super disorienting, and also very interesting to to kind of push that relearning. Like, there's so many games and different experiences created for VR that play off of this sensation where there's just, you know, the floor is there because you can feel it, but if you look down, there's no floor. And it is very hard to walk, even though you know you're like on your carpet in your house, but you cannot, like, it's so hard to step into the void. And that, I think it's fun to watch that recalibration also from the outside when I have been exploring that with the kids, and see how they're recalibrating in real time, and also to realize, especially for children, that recalibration is more their everyday. They're constantly learning and growing through their experiences.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. So that kind of also brings me back to something that both of you have just brought up, with, which is this idea of the agency of objects. And, you know, I think, Nicole, you often, you know, gender your pieces, and you really think of them as entities that are separate of your own, even though you've created them. So I was wondering if you want to share a little bit more about this idea of the agency of objects and their autonomy.
So I think it has different ways that I'm interested in this topic. Like, I think the main one, by creating kind of like, yeah, creating like these objects and these pieces that they end up having their own agency. Somehow they also find their own path, right? Like I think, I mean, it's something that I always have thought. For example, I'm also a musician since I'm a kid, and it's super interesting when I started, like, for example, recording music and putting it out there, having bands and stuff like that. It's interesting to understand that the music was never over, like, not because you like put it in a CD, or like put it out there like in Spotify or something like that. It ended. Like, it continues living, and it continues living because it's shared with others, right? And in that sense, like, I really love when like things are like open-ended, and things like they don't stop because you stop the creation. Like when you when like, because nothing, it's like static, right? As I was like talking before about vibrations and resonance, and understanding of the dynamism of matter and everything in the world, is like something that I really believe in. It's something that I really practice in my everyday life, and in the way that I relate to everything. Um, so when there's something super interesting about artworks, that they are never ending pieces. It's super interesting when artwork itself like has the capacity of like surprising you, the capacity of like changing the rules of the game, the capacity of like just be constantly dynamic and evolving somehow, and presenting new possibilities. Like that randomness, I think it's so important, because that's how the world works, that's how life is. And I think like there's a lot of sense of control when there's a creation. There's a lot of sense of control when you're doing an experiment. But I'm really like most interested to work by releasing that control, but by seeing what would be the possibilities when you let go, right? When things, they have their own path somehow.
There's a great quote from Mario Andretti, the race car driver, about if you feel like you're in control, you're not going fast enough.
Wow, yeah.
I
That's
actually
scary, but it's so real, yeah.
I learned that from Frank Stella, and thinking about his paintings, and kind of breaking preconceptions about what art can do and how it can perform in a kind of interactive capacity. Painting maybe traditionally is thought of very differently than sculpture, or these objects that you've been making, certainly very differently from instruments. But so much of what you're saying about the dynamics, I think, is one of the things that I've been looking for in my work for a long time, wanting to make artworks that through their intricate abstractions and complicated patterns keep the eyes moving and create illusions of dynamics that have a sense of life and ever-changing, evolving. And then recently with the experiments with augmented reality, creating sort of functional dynamics through an AR experience of the painting. And it's exciting to think about what possibilities are unfolding for interactivity with paintings in a way that hasn't really been possible before through these kinds of technologies.
Yeah. I'm also like, I mean, I do think that painting, it's something that for sure has a relationship with the audience, right? And each of the audience members in such a different way. It makes me think like what Leonie asked me, like that I didn't answer very well, but about that I do like call my these pieces, I call them by like she or he, or like kind of like gendering these pieces. And I think because they really trigger some sort of like us painting does, they trigger some sort of like intersubjectivity. They are relating, even if they're not interactive pieces, like even like they are creating ideas, they are creating like a conversation. They are being part of this relationship. They are interactive, even if they're not interactive in a like electronic way, in a computerized way, right? So I think there's something that about intersubjectivity that really happens by encountering art pieces. As it's like a dynamics of relationship, as when we encounter other humans and we need to like discover them. Same happens with art, I think, even if it's like bidimensional, more like traditional art, it's still there. And I guess with technology and like these like new tools that we have in hand, maybe we have like the means to explore this further, maybe to push it a little bit, to see what can be broken also by doing that, which is exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. Um, we should talk more about breaking things, but I wanted to pick up on this idea about like, where is the artwork? Is it in the object or is it in the experience? You know, and I think there's a kind of culturally, people would assume that the art is the object and it's just there. But as artists, we know that that's not where it is. It's in the experience, both of making it and viewing or interacting with it. So
For sure, yeah. And I would say like it's in the experience, as long as the experience it's relational, right? Like it's in that relationship, in that trigger. Because yeah, like the artwork by itself doesn't. I mean, it's like some like imagine like putting yourself like in a room. Like the good thing about being us is like to be able to relate to others, right? To connect, to collaborate, to be collective somehow.
So one of the things that I think that that's also an active agent in both of your works is this idea of space, like the space between things, but then also space itself. And space is almost a medium in both of your work as I see it. And it also explores space as a subject matter. Maybe in Nathan, I'm thinking of, you know, you're often exploring this kind of internal space, this meditative space, a space within you, but also what you were just both talking about, the discourse between works of art and the spaces between objects and works of art, and then Nicole, I think with you, you've taken it to this, extraterrestrial level, which is just so exciting, and, really exploring cosmos and space in this very grand scale. So I would like to ask both of you to just respond to this concept of space in your work.
Nicole, go first. I want to look something up to share with everybody.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, I think space is like central but to my practice, I can see also like in Nathan's work, but very similar to what we were talking before. Like it has to do with this scenario for relationships to happen and encounters to emerge somehow. And I do see space as what happens between bodies, like this, like kind of like yeah, like this, like I think bodies they build up space, like not only walls, right? So it's interesting to understand how the space itself it's another body, and for example how the space itself it's also performing, and it's a dynamic body that fosters contains a set of relationships, a set of dynamics, but the space it's also in this dynamism. So that's interesting for me because when I talk a lot about like extending kind of like our scope of what it's like our space of action, which tends to be around like our context, tends to be framed in on Earth also, but it's like also there is a space of action between Earth and other bodies that are like other planets and other cosmic bodies. So I think it's important to understand that that space it's really like an elastic thing in the end, and it depends where you place yourself is how how the scope can be enlarged, how your context can be enlarged, and how do you think like with stars, for example, or no, or only until the clouds, like what does that mean, right? So I think there's like a lot of like a lot to explore there, in the sense of not really like by just like sending spaceships and burning fossil fuel, but also like understanding like the stories that connect us to the stars, like the stories that place ourselves in on Earth, and the way that we can also like understand to navigate Earth by being connected to the cosmos. And I think there's a lot there that we need to be aware of, that we don't pay too much attention to, at least in Western culture. That's not an evident thing all the time.
So it's great to think about the cosmos as space and remember, it's so easy to just get tied up in the small spaces of our existence, our rooms that we're in, and our head spaces. I think it's great, and one of art's really great abilities is to reframe content, like recontextualize frameworks for thinking, and to expand them. I think I was just thinking so much about the desert while I was listening to you talk, thinking about the stars, thinking about times that I've been in the desert and had that boundary of Earth really question, like just it's so powerful to remember, and it's just crazy that we don't think about it all the time. Being on this planet, we're just sort of so busy, with all our small spaces. And it's also daunting. It's impossibly vast. It's scary to really contemplate the scope of the universe at its full scale. I remember, so I don't know if, well, the story of the Voyager spacecraft, and just tuned into something a few years back when they were talking about them reaching what's called the helio sheath, maybe. the edge of where the pressure of the sunlight sort of starts to fall off, and it's very even. The sun's creating this nice even bubble, basically, and then at the edge, it gets all crazy, and just trying to conceptualize what that is like, and what it's like for those two spacecraft that are still, plummeting through. I guess those two objects are the pieces of Earth that have traveled the farthest at this point.
So maybe our last topic that I'm going to bring up before we go to our Q&A is just this idea of a studio practice as an experimental practice, and also how both of you really allow for and create opportunities for failure within your practice, and that those failures often become the openings or opportunities for new discovery. Nicole, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, for me, it has been like really like something that I've been learning in the past year since I am at MIT, in this context where, I mean, there's a lot of like science going on around my laboratory. There's a lot of like collaborations with scientists, conversations with engineers. So that's like super interesting to be working from that position and in that perspective. And in the same time, it has led me to kind of like appropriate a little bit like the tools of the scientists, the tools of the laboratories, and the tools for the experiments, but then also like twist them a little bit in order to see what can happen with these tools in the art practice, right? As part of the research. And in that sense, for sure, it has been super interesting for me to understand that the more and more that I work with that type of methodology, the more and more that I'm trying to like, instead of answering questions, to ask more questions. Instead of finding answers, it's really like to open up more questions to like, so that's why I love this idea of like randomness and like to open up possibilities for things to fail, for mistakes to happen, for things not to work as I wanted them to work. Because when they don't fulfill the hypothesis and their main like objective, they really like open up other ways of thinking. They really like defy and like kind of like break my own like mental chains that I was like, oh, this is what I want, this is how I'm gonna do it, and I start building the things, and then it's like they behave completely different. And I think that there's so much beauty in that, because like, for example, like the telemetron is such a good it's like such a good example that it ended up, I think what I learned from the experiment, because what I wanted to happen didn't happen, it taught me so much more and gave it another layer that is much more interesting for the project and continuing in this process. Like now, for example, we've been working on 3 new more musical instruments for microgravity, and it's just they came out of like this process of failing, of like finding new opportunities, new questions, like more and more things to be asked about that. I don't know how do you relate to that somehow, Nathan, in your practice?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how it's culturally, failure is not celebrated. We do not do a good job about failing quick or failing in ways that we learn from. It's something that I've been trying to recalibrate my practice in a way to accommodate more of that, because for some of the really big projects that I was working on, for their 6-month project, failure is not something I want to encourage in that.
I mean, it's terrible, but in the end, I mean, I understand, and there's a lot of apprehensions. I mean, there's a lot of resources, there's so much time involved, and effort and emotions. So, but personally, like I appreciate it a lot, and I it's not that I look for it, but I try to set up the things so things emerge, so things they take their own way somehow, and agency in these objects is present somehow.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting to hear how you've been approaching your practice in terms of um, being in a scientific community and like kind of starting out with a clear hypothesis, maybe not super clear, an artistic hypothesis, something that whereby you can really measure a failure and really track it and learn from it. So much of what I had been doing earlier in my practice was just finding a flow, like trying to understand what it was that I had to work with, what, when I turned on the tap in the studio, what would come out, and how I could shape that by designing a process around, my training was in sculpture, not in painting. And I think there's a lot of attention to process in sculpture that then I brought into my painting practice, trying to orchestrate an environment from which the artwork that I wanted could emerge, and trying to kind of cultivate that or nurture that possibility of an emergent phenomena. So far too little control maybe to judge for failure in a scientific way to really learn from. But that's been changing. I've been trying to get smarter and fail in more educational ways.
So Nathan, I think we're going to now open it up to some questions. And Bill, I think you're going to be first. You've posted it in the chat, but maybe you can just say it out loud.
Yeah, I wish I could. I'm not even sure how to ask the question. It started out being, are either one of you synesthetes? And then sort of extended to, I know that you, for instance, it probably is fairly trivial to associate a color with a musical note or something like that in the programming of VAR or VR, AR. But I'm wondering whether you have any sense of how that technology might extend people's sensory perception, if you will, as opposed to simply creating an artificial environment to leverage the senses that, as they already are, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it makes sense. And I've been thinking about it a lot. I think the medium, especially VR, has a lot of potential for what do you call it? Like synthesizing synesthesia, like trying to emulate that in a way that could be used for learning. It's something that I haven't begun to research, but it seems very possible and very interesting. And one way that I think there's some avenues is just how tightly we can link biofeedback signals to what's coming in to the headset, and the possibility of haptics, vibrations in the controllers or in other sensory stimuli, feedback interfaces. There's a lot of possibilities to create interesting multi-sensory experiences that kind of blend expected inputs. Maybe.
Thank you.
Do you want to respond as well, Nicole, or we can go to the next question?
I don't work very much in VR and AR, but I heard that there's also like a lot of like different people like that they're doing experiments like to augment the senses and also like bring a lot with smell, for example, and how that can trigger like some sort of like memories and link with what you're seeing and hearing. It creates like other relationships to those environments. So I think for sure it's it's a world to explore.
Thank you. Gary, you had a question?
Oh, sure. Yeah, my question was, how can we use art to help humanity think more long term? And can we use art to help us think more flexibly? Since I think one of the ways that we can create a better future, especially a better long-term future, is by increasing the space of possibilities rather than closing things off. And I wonder what you both think about how we can use all art forms, music, painting, sculpture, anything, to stimulate that kind of thinking, um, to bring it to wider audiences, um, and essentially to help us create that kind of a better future.
So I really think that art it's a really powerful tool. Mostly because, as you were saying a little bit in your question, it's like it stimulates imagination, and by stimulating imagination, you can really like propose other ways, right? Like you can propose like how to break, for example, some paradigms that seems to be very rigid. Art is a space for where you can like really explore other ways, where you can, for example, encounter different perspectives in things and present them and connect to people with a different perspective, but in an open way, let's say. I really think that art, it's a tool for imagining and proposing possible futures, but this idea of like proposing possible futures that sounds very sci-fi, actually, I really believe that it can change the way we relate today, like in our presence with the ideas and the types of understandings of the axioms that we have. Art is a territory for exploration. And as you say, like arts in general, so not only like, it's like music, even writing, poetry, like painting, like art as the wide, as open as it can be.
Something that comes to mind for me with that, Gary, is a bit of a frustration, really, with how the general population maybe engages or not with art. And I think that it's great to know about these possibilities, but they miss a good deal of the population. And so one of the reasons why I've been excited to explore game science and design is because I see gaming and gameplay as a different vector for creating experiences that can deliver some of these imagination challenging opportunities that maybe aren't reaching a segment of the population that we really want to cultivate and inspire. I think that for me, one of the main drives of making the paintings has been to push back against the ideas of the world as static objects and to kind of create subtle experiences that can disrupt that habit of knowing the world as such and plant seeds of experience that can be reminders of other possibilities in other ways. So I want to turn up the volume on that and really looking for the mechanics to do that.
I think that one thing that would be super important in your question is like, yeah, for sure, like there's one thing that is like the art world, like at museums, art fairs, like the art like as a market somehow. And there's other thing that is art in general, like that I think art has these possibilities and should be explored further or further reinforced in education, for example. So I think it's less about I mean, I would love that it's more about like creating like a wider mainstream access to museums and things that sometimes tend to be a little bit elitist for some segments of the population. So that would be amazing, but that's that's hard. I mean, there are no museums in every city, in every town, in everywhere in the world. So it's tough. Like I think there's something, but one thing that can be widespread and it's the access to art through education. So I think there's like a lot of work to do there, and there's like huge potential and important things to do there.
Thank you. Definitely an important comment there. We have one final question from Grant. Would you like to ask it?
Sure. Thanks, Leonie, and thank you, Nathan and Nicole, for fascinating kind of discussion so far here. As I said in my question, we do live in unusual times, and the rhythm of civilization, the rhythm of society, the rhythm of our lives has been substantially disrupted for most of us by the pandemic, and a lot of downsides, some upside, some uncertainty there. But for artists and for art, this must create certain specific opportunities as well. This moment that we're in, and I'm curious on what you. I mean, I'm sure you've thought a lot about this over the last few months, and I'm curious what conclusions you draw about the opportunities for art and artists during a pandemic and during in the space and the novelty that's created by the pandemic. I'm curious on your thoughts.
I was just thinking about Gary's question a little bit more too, and it ties into that for me, Grant. And Nicole, you pointed out education really is a great answer to how art can be more valuable. Is more people making more art is how it becomes more valuable, right? And understanding that the power of that process is where the real art is. I was thinking, Grant, about how artists, we have to constantly navigate ambiguity, like not knowing what's going on. And this is an experience that we're going through culturally now, where we have to reevaluate our systems of valuation and what we value personally deeply. We're all spending a lot more time in kind of contemplative modes, which a lot of the goal of a lot of artwork is to drive that contemplative experience. So I think that one interesting thing is that more people are kind of entering this space of needing to deal with ambiguity in a way that is important. I think we try to avoid it. We want to have concrete direction and clear understanding of what's happening, what the possibilities are for the future. So this, a different kind of heliopause, John, this moment of taking a pause from our regular habits. It's a lot of times, I think, breaking these habits, the habits that we use to interact with the world, lock us into certain ways of seeing the world. And by undermining those habits, we all have an opportunity to see deeper and farther and reevaluate where we want to go.
Yeah, I agree with you, Nathan. There's like a lot of recalibration to be done, right? And also like it is for sure a moment of detention, pause, and reflection. But it's also it's terrible everything that is happening, and it's been really tough in many ways for everybody in different ways. But it's also a good reminder of what are the type of relationships that we want to have with each other, what are the type of relationships that we and responsibilities that we're taking also to our world, to our environment, to other species. How do we reformulate that too in this moment? How do we think again about that? How can we break some paradigms that took us where we are. So I think it's an important moment to also like think about the possibilities of change and reformulating things. Like today we're reformulating what distance means for sure. Like I mean, I wish we were all together in a room, right? Like that would be, I hope we can do that in a couple of months sometime. But I think there's like more structural things that we need to think about, and as a society to really see how can we change some things, right? And I think that's important. So it's a crisis and it's terrible, but also in all the crises, there's a space for possibilities and new opportunities.
Yeah, thank you so much on that beautiful note. It definitely can also be a generative moment. So yeah, so I think that brings us to the end of our organized part of the conversation.